She lost 50 pounds. Every single pound stripped away by heat and hunger and a forest that does not negotiate. When the woman on Highway 82 pulled over, she thought she'd spotted a wounded deer dragging itself along the tree line. Something small, something broken, something that should already be dead. It wasn't a deer. It was a 25-year-old woman, naked, covered from scalp to sole in insect bites, lacerations, and a sunburn so severe her skin had begun to peel away in sheets. Her hair was matted into a single solid mass. Her feet were cut so deeply that each step left a faint red impression on the asphalt. And her eyes, glassy, unfocused, scanning a world she could barely see, stared up at the woman who had stopped as if she couldn't quite believe the road was real. 28 days. That is how long Lisa Theris had been inside those woods. 28 days with no food beyond wild berries and mushrooms she couldn't clearly see. No water beyond muddy puddles and creek silt she squeezed through her fingers like a filter. No shelter. No shoes. No glasses. Lisa Theris is legally blind without corrective lenses, and her glasses were not with her when she ran. Here is what science will tell you. The human body begins to experience organ failure after 72 hours without water. In the Alabama summer heat, consistently above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity pressing the air down like a wet cloth, that window closes faster. Add complete disorientation, legal blindness, venomous snakes, coyotes, and a forest so dense that investigators would later describe it as a place where sound disappears after 20 meters. The odds of surviving 1 week were almost zero. The odds of surviving 28 days were, by any clinical measure, non-existent. And yet, there is something about this case that has never been fully explained. Not by the sheriff, not by the doctors, not by Lisa herself. Something that sits at the edge of the story like a shadow at the tree line. Something that, the deeper you go, becomes less a miracle of survival and more a question that has no clean answer. Bullock County, Alabama, July 2017. A stretch of rural land 44 miles southeast of Montgomery, where the forests grow thick and silent and the roads thin out to nothing. This is where Lisa Theris disappeared. And this is where, 28 days later, she came back. To understand how she ended up alone in those woods, you have to go back to the evening of July 18th. Lisa was 25 years old, 5 feet 5 inches tall, brown hair, blue eyes, a former waitress who had recently enrolled at Wallace Community College in Eufaula, studying to become a radiologist. By every account from people who knew her, she was the kind of young woman who was trying to build something, trying to turn the page, trying to move forward. She also suffered from bipolar disorder. She was legally blind, and in the weeks before she disappeared, people close to her had grown quietly worried. The crowd she was spending time with had changed. 2 men in particular, Manly Green Davis, 31 years old, from the town of Troy, and Randall Wade Oswald, 36. Both men were well known to law enforcement. Both men had extensive records. Both men that night had a plan. On July 19th, in the early morning hours, the 3 of them drove out to County Road 47 in Midway, to a hunting camp on Pleasant Hill Road. What Lisa says she did not know, what investigators believe she genuinely did not know, is that the men were planning to break in, to ram through the metal entrance gate, to steal 4-wheelers, chainsaws, trailers, a zero-turn lawnmower, and various tools. Over $40,000 worth of property belonging to someone else. When Lisa understood what was about to happen, she made a decision in a fraction of a second. She opened the truck door, and she ran. Into the woods, into the dark, into a night she could barely see, without glasses, without shoes, without anything except the clothes on her back. She ran until the sound of the truck was gone, until the road was gone, until every direction looked exactly the same. And then she was lost. Let's talk about what Bullock County Forest means in practical terms. This is not a hiking trail with markers and rest stations. This is thousands of acres of southern wilderness, pine forest, hardwood stands, creek beds, tangled undergrowth, so dense that a person can walk in a straight line for an hour and emerge exactly where they started. Investigators would later determine that Lisa, for much of her 28 days, was never more than a mile from the nearest road. 1 mile. That detail should comfort you. Instead, it should terrify you, because it means the forest didn't need to be vast to be inescapable. It just needed to be itself. In summer, that part of Alabama sits under a heat that is physical, almost architectural. Temperatures routinely above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity so thick the air has weight. At night, the temperature drops just enough for the insects to become something else entirely. Not an annoyance, a presence, a relentless, crawling, biting darkness that covered every inch of exposed skin and did not stop. The bugs weren't so bad during the day because it was so hot, Lisa would later say. But at night, it was the worst. Add to this the wildlife. Eastern diamondback rattlesnakes, copperheads, black widow spiders, coyotes. All of them native to that terrain. All of them active in the summer dark. And Lisa, barefoot and nearly blind, moving through undergrowth at night, unable to see what was inches from her feet. Every step was a lottery. Every step for 28 days, she won. Her father, William Theris, reported her missing on July 23rd, 5 days after she had last spoken to him. 5 days in which a family held on to hope, because sometimes people just go quiet for a while. Sometimes the phone just isn't answered. Sometimes there's a simple explanation. There wasn't. The investigation began. The Troy Police Department took the case, then passed it to the Bullock County Sheriff's Office as the evidence pointed southeast. Manly Davis was spotted in his car, led police on a chase, ditched the vehicle on Rick Street, and was found hiding in the back seat of a car at a nearby residence. He was arrested July 31st, charged with burglary. Questioned about Lisa. Randall Oswald evaded capture for another week, leading law enforcement on a chase that crossed 3 counties before he ran out of gas and fled into the woods in Crenshaw County, where he was caught. He was also charged with burglary. He was also questioned about Lisa. And here's where the case becomes something else entirely. Both men, in custody and separately questioned, became convinced that Lisa was dead. Not presumed dead. Convinced. So convinced that Oswald told investigators a specific story. He said that Davis had shot Lisa in the head, placed her body in a garbage bag, and thrown it into a creek. Law enforcement mobilized cadaver dogs. Divers entered the water. 2 full days of searching for a body that didn't exist. The Bullock County Sheriff would later describe both men as being, in his words, so geeked out they started blaming each other for a murder that didn't happen. While the two men were accusing each other of a crime that never occurred, Lisa Theris was alive, somewhere in those thousands of acres, moving, crawling, trying. Law enforcement swept the area around the hunting camp repeatedly, alongside multiple agencies. They covered ground. They called her name. Nothing. The chief deputy of Bullock County, Anthony Williams, would later make a statement that deserves to be repeated carefully. "We are 110% sure she was out there the whole time." 110%. The phrasing is interesting. Not the usual law enforcement language of cautious certainty. Something more emphatic. As if the question of whether she was truly out there had been asked loudly enough to require that kind of answer. Now let's talk about what Lisa says she did to stay alive. Because this is where the story stops being implausible and starts being almost impossible to process. And this is what the case files won't fully explain. She foraged. Nearly blind, in terrain she didn't know, she found wild berries and mushrooms by feel and by proximity. She drank from muddy puddles, from creek water, from rain she squeezed from her own hair when it fell. "If it rained," she said in her ABC interview, "I'd have to squeeze the water out of my hair and drink it." Every night she found a tree to sleep under. Not a shelter, not a hollow, a tree. She said it was comforting. In the way that something solid and ancient and indifferent might feel like an anchor when everything else is dissolving. She also carved a walking staff from a branch she found near the roots of a fallen tree. She scooped out the root end to fit her hand. She carried it with her for the rest of the 28 days. When she was rescued and placed in a patrol car, she thought she had lost it. A deputy noticed, put the staff in his car, brought it to her at home. It was the one thing she brought out of the forest. She kept track of the days in her head, without a watch, without a phone, without any way to confirm whether the sun that rose was the same sun she had seen before or one she was dreaming. She kept track. 28 marks she carried in her mind like a calendar made of nothing but will. "The only thing that kept me going," she said, "was my family. I just kept thinking about how I had to see my family again." It was all about finding the road or finding a person, she told ABC News. "I couldn't even hear any cars the whole time I was out there until the end." Read that again, slowly. 28 days in a forest that investigators say was never more than a mile from a road. She could not hear traffic. She could not hear engines. She could not hear the world she was trying to reach. The forest absorbed everything. The trees held the sound in the way they hold everything, without intent, without mercy, without even the acknowledgement that something small and human was trying to find its way out. That is the thing about the Alabama forest that no diagram conveys. Sound behaves differently in dense woodland. It scatters. It bends. It vanishes after 20 or 30 meters of thick undergrowth and trunk density. A highway can exist on the other side of 50 trees, and to the person among them, there is only silence. Investigators said she was within a mile of a road. And yet, for 28 days, it might as well have been on another planet. August 12th, 2017. Somewhere around 2 p.m. Judy Garner, a Florida woman who works as a caregiver, had just left her boss's deer camp near Union Springs and was driving east on Highway 82. She glanced toward the tree line. Something was moving at the edge of the road. Low, slow, wrong. She pulled over. What she found was Lisa Theris, crawling, naked, sun-baked and insect-ravaged, and down somewhere between 40 and 50 pounds from the woman she had been on July 18th. Garner went back to her van and got water. Lisa drank it quickly. Garner got her a shirt that buttoned up and some boxer shorts. Lisa said it felt good to have clothes on. Garner called 911. Dispatchers told her the woman she was helping had been missing for more than 3 weeks. I started shaking, Garner said. I was crying, I was scared, and I didn't know what to do. She waited with Lisa until paramedics arrived. She stayed at her side as law enforcement pulled up. All of the members of law enforcement had big smiles on their faces, Garner said. They were rejoicing that she'd been found. The location where Lisa emerged was approximately 30 miles southeast of the hunting camp, where she had entered the woods. 30 miles. Over rough terrain, in the dark, nearly blind, barefoot, over 28 days. How she traveled that distance has never been fully explained. She was transported to the emergency room in Bullock County. The photographs released by the sheriff's office. Photographs released specifically to answer the skeptics. Tell a physical story that words almost can't contain. The insect bites covered her entire body, every visible inch. The poison ivy welts had layered over sunburn that had layered over lacerations that had been reopened and rehealed and reopened again. The soles of her feet were damaged in a way consistent with weeks of barefoot movement through roots and rocks and creek gravel. Investigators said the photographs were released because social media had raised questions. Maybe after they see all the facts and photos, said Chief Deputy Anthony Williams. Maybe it will change some of their minds that she was out there the whole time, because the pictures tell the story. The pictures do tell a story, but there are parts of the story the pictures do not reach. Let's place the known facts in a line and look at what they make. Lisa Theris entered the woods in the early morning hours of July 19th. Barefoot and without glasses she needs to legally see. She was in terrain she did not know, in complete darkness. She survived 28 days in Alabama summer heat, with temperatures regularly above 90 degrees, by drinking creek water and eating berries and mushrooms she foraged while effectively blind. She avoided venomous snakes and spiders native to that ecosystem. She avoided coyotes. She did not develop a fatal infection despite hundreds of open lacerations over the course of a month. She did not die of dehydration. She did not die of heat. And somehow, despite never being more than a mile from a road that multiple search teams covered repeatedly, no one found her. And she found no one. The survival medicine community refers to a threshold called the Rule of Threes. 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter in extreme conditions, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food. Lisa Theris operated beyond nearly every one of those thresholds simultaneously, in conditions that maximize the physiological cost of each. When she was found, she was critically weakened, but she was alive, conscious, speaking. Carrying a walking staff she had carved with her own hands. Now come the theories, and here is where the case fractures. Because there is not one clean version of what happened in those woods. There are several, and none of them entirely satisfy. The first is the version Lisa gave. She fled a crime scene in fear, became lost in unfamiliar forest, and survived on instinct and willpower alone. This version is supported by the physical evidence: the wounds, the weight loss, the staff, the photographs. It is supported by the testimony of the woman who found her, who described Lisa as lethargic, barely able to move, saying she didn't think Lisa could have survived much longer. It is also supported by the fact that Bullock County Sheriff Raymond Rogers, who investigated the case directly, stated publicly, "We are 110% sure she was out there the whole time." The second theory comes from law enforcement itself. Sheriff Rogers also told reporters in a separate statement that he believed Lisa had been using methamphetamine that night, that the disorientation that follows a methamphetamine episode could explain why she became so deeply lost despite being so close to a road, that the hallucinations could have caused her to remove her clothing, a documented phenomenon in extreme stimulant toxicity, sometimes called excited delirium. "I think she was on meth," the sheriff said. "She was hallucinating, and she just got lost in the woods. She was probably so under the influence that she stripped her clothes off." Lisa herself, when asked by ABC News whether she thought she had been drugged, said, "It would make sense, but I'm not sure." Her father added, "I think I heard that may be so." Those are careful words. Words that neither confirm nor deny. Words that leave something open that perhaps shouldn't be left open. And this is where the third theory lives. Because there is a third version, never officially confirmed, never officially dismissed, that some investigators quietly considered. That Lisa, for some portion of those 28 days, may have remained in the woods intentionally, not because she chose the wilderness over civilization, but because she had a reason to avoid what was waiting for her on the other side of the tree line. A court date that had been set for a misdemeanor disorderly conduct charge from a courthouse incident on June 8th. A charge that, interestingly, was dropped on August 10th, 2 days before she emerged from the woods. Dropped because the court presumed she was dead. The manager of the burglarized hunting lodge, George Oswald, father of one of the accused men, was blunt in a way that law enforcement was not. "If she's a sweet little princess who got lost in the woods for all this time," he said, "then I'm the Pope." Those are not the words of careful analysis, but they represent a current that ran beneath the official version of events, a skepticism that the physical evidence alone does not fully silence. Because there is one number that refuses to resolve: 30 miles. The distance between the hunting camp and where she emerged. 30 miles of forested terrain, barefoot, nearly blind, in 28 days. How? Let's set the theories down for a moment. Because underneath all of them is a single biological reality that no investigative theory can fully absorb. And it is this: Lisa Theris is legally blind without corrective lenses. She has a chronic eye condition. Without her glasses, she cannot see clearly at any functional distance. And her glasses were not with her. Imagine navigating 4 weeks of wilderness survival, identifying which berries are edible versus toxic, which mushrooms are safe versus lethal, which direction to walk when every direction of blurred green looks the same, which shape on the ground is a root and which is a coiled snake, with severely compromised vision. In that context, foraging alone becomes less an act of survival and more an act of something that sits uncomfortably close to the word impossible. A slight misidentification of a mushroom species, and there are several fatally toxic varieties native to Alabama woodland that visually resemble edible ones, would have ended her story in the first week. It didn't. Not once in 28 days. There is a phrase that wilderness survival experts use when a case exceeds statistical modeling. They call it an outlier event. Something that happens so far outside the probability distribution that it can only be counted as an anomaly. Not impossible. Just beyond the reach of the model. Beyond what the numbers are built to contain. Lisa Theris is an outlier event. The question is only whether the outlier is the survival itself, or something we haven't yet found the right question to ask. What the forest took from Lisa Theris is visible in every photograph. 50 pounds. Skin that had been burned and bitten and torn and rebuilt and torn again. Feet that would take weeks to heal. A body that had been pushed past the edges of what medicine says a body can do. She started gaining weight back immediately. 10 pounds in the first week. She returned to her studies. She spoke to reporters with something in her voice that sounded less like relief and more like a quiet, bone-level gratitude that the people who haven't been close to the edge cannot fully understand. It makes you appreciate everything, she said. Every little thing. Lisa Theris was never charged with any crime related to the events of July 19th. Manly Davis and Randall Oswald were charged with third-degree burglary and felony theft. Their cases were presented to a grand jury. The Bullock County forest is still there, still dense, still silent, still holding in its roots and its shadows and its sound-swallowing undergrowth, whatever it holds. The hunting camp on County Road, 47 in Midway, is still there. The gate that 2 men tried to ram through is still there. And somewhere, in the 30 miles between that gate and the stretch of Highway 82, where Judy Garner pulled over, there is a route that a nearly blind young woman walked in the Alabama heat. A route that no one has retraced. A route that perhaps cannot be retraced. Because the forest does not leave receipts. Sheriff Rogers, in one of his last public statements about the case, said something simple. Thank God she is alive. And then, there's a whole lot more to this story. He did not elaborate. He has not elaborated since. That sentence has been sitting in the public record since August 2017, like a door left slightly open in a house everyone has already left. A whole lot more. More than what was told. More than what was released. More than what the photographs show. What that more is, no one has said publicly. And maybe no one will. The Alabama forest is not cruel. It does not want anything from you. It does not pursue. It does not stalk. It simply exists in a state of complete and ancient indifference, as it has existed for thousands of years before Lisa Theris ran into it, and as it will exist for thousands of years after her story has been forgotten. That indifference is what makes it dangerous. Not malice, not intention. Just the vast, silent, absolute absence of any concern for whether you make it out. Today, Highway 82 still cuts through Bullock County the way it always has. People drive it every day, windows down, watching the tree line pass at 70 miles an hour, not thinking about what the tree line holds. Not thinking about the stretch of asphalt near Union Springs, where a woman crawled out of the undergrowth with a carved wooden staff and 50 fewer pounds than she had carried in. The forest doesn't mark the spot. The forest doesn't mark anything. It just keeps growing the way it always has, closing over everything that enters it, questions included. Lisa Theris survived something that the numbers say she shouldn't have survived. That much is not in dispute. What she survived Exactly. The full shape of it. The parts the photographs don't show. That is another question. One that the sheriff hinted at. One that the forest absorbed. One that may have no answer that satisfies. And perhaps that is the most honest thing that can be said about this case. Not that it is unsolved, but that it is, in the precise clinical sense of the word, unexplained. Lisa defied the forest without her sight. 28 days, blind and barefoot, and the wilderness could not hold her. But there is a question that this case leaves behind, one that points toward a darkness in a different direction entirely. What happens when the person doesn't disappear at all? What happens when someone is exactly where they should be, visible, traceable, present, and it is the searchers who become blind? What happens when the trained dogs refuse to follow the trail? When the rangers walk past the same spot for days and find nothing? When the helicopters sweep an open ridgeline and come back empty? When everything designed to find a missing person works perfectly and still finds nothing? That is the next case. A mountain in California. A man who was there. A search that should have been simple. And an absence that has never been explained.